Teachers of Reddit. What is the funniest thing that has happened in your classroom to a student that, as a teacher, you were not allowed to laugh at? Student waiting late after rehearsal. Kid calls home. Hey, can you tell mom to pick me up? Oh, she's in the shower. What about dad? He's in the shower too. Turns to teacher. It's going to be a while, Mr. M. Let's call back after around 2 minutes. Mr. M. Must have been a Wednesday. I had a student who had extreme test anxiety. Every time we went to take a test he would throw up. After vomiting he would be fine, but he had to spew everywhere first for stress reduction or something. I would seat him next to the bathroom and provide a bucket. Now this worked on normal days, but during our state testing he would not be able to go to the restroom unless I first called an administrator to escort him. On the big testing day we practiced breathing techniques. I had a handy vomit bucket for him and we were ready to go. After 10 minutes he sure enough looked like he was going to be sick. Except he forgot about the bucket. He vomits and then tried to hold it in his mouth. He shoved his puke back in his mouth, swallowed and smiled at me and gave me a thumbs up. Horrified, yet simultaneously holding back laughter, I gave him wipes and a bunch of mints. The kid did great on the test in the end. I need some gum after reading that. I believe my brother has posted about this before. Our aunt teaches kindergarten, so with 5-year-olds, in an unprivileged neighborhood. Often, the kids are exposed to swearing and profanity at a young age. One time, she asked her students to sit crisscross applesauce and one kid wasn't paying attention. His friend next to him whispered, "Hey, crisscross applesauce mother sucker." Needless to say, my aunt couldn't contain her laughter and had to leave the room for a minute. I taught English at a high school in Spain last year. We did a geography exercise where I would pronounce the English version of a country or body of water's name, and they would repeat it in unison. I came across the Aegean Sea, and I had no idea how to pronounce it. In my flustered confusion I tried, and said Aegean Sea, I think, and without hesitation everyone repeated Aegean Sea I think. I lost it, and to this day I'm pretty sure they still don't know why. During a semester abroad in Florence, we taught elementary age Italian kids English, and one of my friends was from New Jersey and had a thick Jersey accent. To this day I still laugh about a generation of Italian kids asking for a cup of coffee. I was a teacher's aide in a 3rd grade classroom. It was the last day of school before spring break and all the kids were so excited. It's a big party day. We had pizza, watched the Muppets movie, and all the kids brought gifts or dessert foods for everyone else. One kid who didn't have that much money wanted to make personalized bookmarks for the rest of the class. Because his family didn't have much money, he decided to look around his dad's workplace to find something he could use. In the trash can there were a bunch of long strips of cardboard. The only thing was the cardboard came from cigarette cartons and his dad worked at a liquor store. So on one side there was a kid's name and cute pictures. On the other was blatant advertising for Marlboro, Pall Mall, Camel, you name it. It was so hard to not laugh when he came up to me and excitedly showed them to me. This was my first time working in a classroom and I had no idea what to do. The teacher ended up having me take them to the supply room and laminate them with construction paper covering the other side. We told the kid it would help them last longer. His bookmarks were everyone's favorite gift. Mine still has the Al Capone logo on the back though. That's so awesome that the teacher had you put construction paper on the back and not just throw them away. Made me tear up. I was teaching EFL to a class of primary school Thai kids. I was teaching them plurals by showing them a slideshow of cartoon monsters. It has 3 eyes, it has 4 legs etc. and getting them to tell me how many limbs and stuff each monster had. One little kid, 5 years old, got really into it and on one monster shoots his hand in the air and comes out with it has 1 anus. I was speechless for a second, so he jumped up on his chair, backwards, bends over and starts pointing to his ass shouting, "No teacher, anus. I tease anus." Well, technically he was right. I teach preschool, so there are a lot of instances in which I'm not allowed to laugh but really want to, can't help it sometimes. Farting is probably the most common, but 2 particular stories stick out in my head. This year, we were talking about our families. Dads were a difficult subject of discussion last year because I taught in a neighborhood in which most students didn't have dads, or if they did, they were in jail. Students would shout out things like, "My dad sells drugs," or "My dad yells at my mom," in this oddly excited voice because they didn't have filters yet and were just happy to have a chance to share. This year, most of my students have more traditional families. The other day, one of them shouted out, "My dad snores when he sleeps," and another student responded with, "My dad sleeps naked." Hilarious. Now, I can't look at that dad without blushing. Last year, my classroom carpets that had the alphabet border around the edges. One of my students, Demetrius, liked to sit on the letter D because it was the first letter of his name. One day, Zaria sits on the letter D. Demetrius gets in her face and yells, "Zaria, get off my D, I lost it." My 4-year-old daughter tells everyone that I sleep naked. I actually sleep in my underwear, but I guess that is close enough to naked for a 4-year-old. When I was a junior in high school, I rolled my snowmobile and was pretty banged up. Namely, my mid and lower back was all out of whack. I looked like Quasimodo walking around. One day, in my desktop publishing class, we were all working on something, so it was totally silent save for mouse clicks and keyboard taps. I was in one of those plastic school chairs and moved a weird way. My lower back pelvis popped back into place loudly, and everything from mid back down relaxed, including my butthole. I let out an insanely loud bra rap that echoed off the chair like most of you are aware they do. At the same time, my back felt so good that I let out a loud moan. Everyone froze. Next thing I know, my teacher bolts from her chair and out the door, where we could hear her screaming and laughing hysterically. Holy crap, that made me laugh so hard. Teacher hears a girl's phone vibrating in her purse and says, "I hope that is a phone." Teacher walks another 2 steps and realizes what she just said. Class erupts in laughter. When reading Hamlet with the class, after Ophelia's line about Hamlet, "To speak of horrors, he comes before me," a kid said, "Hamlet, get it together, man." I cracked up. The other kids didn't get it, luckily. Grade 11, reading Romeo and Juliet aloud. There's a line at the beginning where a character says, "Bring me my long sword." Ho. My friend got the inflection on the ho completely wrong. He said it with such enthusiasm too. It was hilarious. I was having a conversation with my manager and my year 2 student comes out of the classroom and says very seriously, "Can I poop?" I had one 1st grade kid kick another 1st grade kid in the nuts, on accident, during freeze dance when they were dancing like ninjas. Apparently a 7-year-old screaming "OW my nuts" and falling down to the ground tested the limits of my professionalism. My wife is a teacher and her and some of the staff were having a meeting inside a classroom. The door was closed and locked. A group of students were outside the classroom waiting for someone to come unlock the door so they can go on in and wait for the class to start. An impatient student started pounding on the door. She was unaware of the staff meeting going on inside. She was persistent with the knocking, so eventually one of the teachers came over and opened the door and let her and her only inside the room. He said, "Come on in, I guess." The entire staff looked at her in silence, then looked at each other while the student just awkwardly stood there with a horrified look on her face. They immediately went back to discussing their meeting. During that time, most of the staff were doing everything they could to keep from laughing. The poor girl continued to just stand there quietly, wide-eyed with a look of horror. We were playing the Shakespearean insult game with another English class, where you send the other guys a play, act, scene, and line number that contains a gorgeously archaic insult. So, like, we'd send Henry the IV Part 1, Act 2, Scene 4, lines 225-226, and the other class would look it up and read, "This sanguine coward, this bed presser, this horseback breaker, this huge hill of flesh," and etc. We were doing that for like a half hour. Then my class gets Romeo and Juliet, Act 1, Scene 5, Line 5, and when we looked it up, your mother, my teacher turned bright red holding it together, then started laughing so hard he had to sit down. Titus Andronicus, Act IV, Scene 2, Line 1765. Aaron, villain, I have done thy mother. toughest exchange I had as a college instructor was in one of my classes where people were conditionally admitted to the MBA program while waiting for their GMAT tests to be completed. I found the occasional student who had heard about an MBA, decided they wanted an MBA, but had no business being in grad school. Here's the most ridiculous exchange. Intro to computer science class. I usually spent a few moments going through a reminder of basic arithmetic skills. Me. So here is a standard formula we could put into a program. G equals -5 and 2. Her. Hand up. Excuse me. What's the dash for? Me. What dash? Where? Her. The one before the 5. Class starts looking around. Me. That's a negative sign. Her. I've never heard of such a thing. Entire class is now looking at her. Me. I assure you, it exists. Worst grade on midterm. She never picked it up. One of my students who knew her told me she was pretty upset with me. I'm sure she was. I taught daycare for 4 years. My favorite was when a 4-year-old would curse. It usually went like this. Crap. Jack said, crap. Miss Fikovich. They said crap. Who said crap? My dad says you can't say crap. My dad says crap all the time. My grandma was a kindergarten teacher for a long time and has some funny stories. In one of these, a little quiet kid randomly came up to her and said, Mrs. H. Jimmy said the frick word. I taught a summer school bio class for remedial students a few years ago. We were talking about viruses and I mentioned that herpes was a virus. A girl in the front row raised her hand and asked if it was possible to catch herpes from fellatio. I said yes and the girl said oh crap. Then took out her phone and started texting. I just quickly moved on with the lesson. My friend is a teacher and he has told me several stories, but 2 from the same student always make me laugh. Now to preface his stories, the student in question is somewhat backwards and country, kinda pudgy with a bad haircut and glasses. Story 1. My friend is standing at the front of the room as class is about to begin. The student comes barging in the room and basically yells at my friend, Mr. G, I don't need your questions. I just need answers. Can I go to the bathroom? My friend was somewhat stunned. Then as he was holding back laughter, he said sure. Story 2. My friend is walking down the hallway headed to his classroom as the bell has just rung. The hallway is basically empty, except for the aforementioned bathroom student. He's standing at his locker with his backpack right in front of it. My friend walks over and says to the student, hey, you need to get to class, to which the kid responds, I'm headed there in a second, Mr. G. My friend sees him messing with his backpack and being secretive, fearing he may have something, drugs, weapon, etc. He asks him what he's doing. The kid pulls his hands out of his locker and is holding 2 small turtles. I teach undergrad courses. I caught a student that had plagiarized a few paragraphs in one of her papers. I asked her to stay after lecture and sat her down, asking if she had plagiarized her paper. Her eyes got huge, she welled up and then she said, I did. I'm so sorry. I was so tired and had so much work and my roommate told me to do it and said you would never find out. Then with the most serious expression she whispered, and I know now she's the devil. I did not laugh even though I really wanted to. I was a student when this happened, but a friend accidentally said octopuses have 8 testicles instead of 8 tentacles when reading in a science class. The teacher was having a very hard time holding back laughter. I accidentally said the same thing in front of my in-laws. They won't let me live it down. Not a teacher, but in my kids' class when they were smaller, they used to do news, where each kid would tell the class about something interesting that happened. One of the teachers told me this. One little girl said, I couldn't sleep last night so I came back downstairs and mommy and daddy were sunbathing in front of the fire. All I can think about is that scene from Videodrome. Not my story, but my little brother's. When he was in 1st grade, he told his teacher a joke. Bro, why did Captain Hook die? Teacher, I don't know. Why? Bro, because he wiped with the wrong hand. Apparently she had to step out of the room for several minutes so she wouldn't be seen laughing at his joke. I don't quite understand why teachers can't laugh at students' jokes. There were fish tanks in our high school biology lab. A student pulled some brightly colored fish gravel out, dried it off, gave it to two of the popular girls and told them it was Pop Rocks. They tried to eat it, which obviously didn't go well, so they, of course, loudly complained to the teacher. When the teacher got involved, the instigator said, "Everyone knows we're not allowed to eat in the biology lab, so it's really their own fault for breaking the rules." The bio teacher did his best not to laugh and no one was punished. I'm obviously a student, not the teacher. I watched one of the sternest teachers I've ever had nearly crack once. We are in the classroom. One kid dares another to sniff a Tipp-Ex spot, white tote, in class while the teacher's back is turned. Kid sniffs Tipp-Ex and then another kid slaps the Tipp-Ex upwards. His nose and a large portion of his face is now covered in Tipp-Ex, so in other words quick drying paint, at which point he stands up and says, "Miss." The teacher turns round to see this kid, about 15 years old at the time, dripping Tipp-Ex and nearly laughs full on in his face but manages to just get it under control, then sends him off to go clean him up. The Tipp-Ex kid nearly made her break again when he started trying to explain the incident. "I was applying Tipp-Ex," says kid. "And then what happened?" says teach. "I fell forwards." I had forgotten about the word Tipp-Ex until now. Brings back old memories. My wife is an elementary art teacher, which basically means constant stories. My favorite is from a time when kindergartners were playing with Play-Doh. Class was ending, and one little fella with a light speech impediment was just standing there, looking down. Wife checks to make sure he's okay. He turns around, showing the little Play-Doh snake he's holding to his crotch and says, "Look, I the whiner. TLDR, I the whiner." Please tell me you say this when initiating steamy times. Not me, but a friend of mine. My friend Mr. B is teaching and the kids are doing a worksheet without talking. Suddenly a kid stands up and pushes his books and things off the desk and turns to the girl to the right of him and says, "Nigger, you smell like hot dog water." I don't know how he kept a straight face. I once saw a large black girl at my school, standing by herself, sniff both her armpits and say, "Ma fat butt smells like GY Ross." My friends and I were laughing pretty hard at that one. My boyfriend of the time had just broken up with me a week earlier. I was working in small groups with my first graders, and one decides to get fresh with me. "Miss Deem 9872, do you have any kids?" No I don't. Pause. "Because you're not married, is that why?" Sure. Silas, that's why. Another pause. "It's because no one wants to marry you, right?" Maybe it's because I was so emotionally unstable, or I actually had run out of emotion, but it took everything in me not to laugh till my sides hurt. I'm not a teacher, but I was talking to my English teacher about an assignment last year while he was marking a year 8 assignment. For the assignment, the students were meant to make example propaganda from Nazi Germany, and one year 8 boy had written on a picture of a concentration camp, "Join the Nazis and you get free pajamas." Safe to say she was in hysterics while telling me how she had to call his parents. I'm having a hard time thinking of one BC. Honestly, I will laugh at all the stupid things my students do, but here's one. In my physics class we were studying thermodynamics and I had my class making heat engines. We were working off a very loose definition that a heat engine is any device that uses heat energy to do work, aka make something move. I had shown them a few examples, one of which was a balloon on top of a flask that expanded as the water in the flask turned to vapor. Their task was to design a heat engine of their own, different than the examples, and build it with what we had in the classroom or what they brought in. I'm still not sure how they got it by me. I suppose there were a lot of groups working at once. I like to think of my classroom as organized chaos, but one group decided that they were going to use the balloon flask idea, since they had to make it different than what I showed them. Instead of a balloon they used a condom. I don't want to think too hard, no pun intended, about how it got there. Did they bring it from home? Did someone already have it on hand? Did they grab it from the wellness center? But I'll let it slide. BC. Hey, it fit my rules. It wasn't until they were demonstrating to the class how it worked and we were watching a limp condom slowly erect that I thought, maybe we should have pulled out. TLDR. Creative kids get away with a steam-powered boner in class. Brilliant. TLDR. I've always wanted a steam-powered boner. One of my middle school teachers was taking attendance one day and said Seaman instead of Simon for one of the kids in the class. Guy laughed for about 5 minutes. I used to teach karate. We have these large kicking bags everywhere around the room. They are solid plastic on the bottom and soft on the part where you kick them, and about 5 feet tall. They look awesome to climb on if you're 4, but we don't allow that. So one day some kid named Jack is climbing on top of one of the bags, and my co-worker yells across the room, "Jack, off." I had to leave the room from laughing. My co-worker did not understand what was so funny. Not a teacher myself, but in high school I had this history teacher, Mr. Gress. He was a great teacher, witty, funny, genuinely loved history, didn't favor the preps and jocks like most of the other teachers, which was an absolute epidemic in my school, being that we lived in a college town famous for its football team, didn't put up with crap from anyone, etc. One day, one of the exceptionally ditzy cheerleaders asked him what the homework assignment was after he'd already repeated it several times. One of the stoner girls yelled out, "Oh my god, you dumb bee. He already said it 3 times. The whole class just died. He issued the standard "okay, quiet down," but you could clearly see Mr. Gress stifling laughter. My high school history teacher was the same way. One day, a ditzy blonde picked an argument with him and retorted at one point with, "Mr. What hen, you're just jealous because I actually have friends." To which he responded, "No, Dana, you're just jealous my friends stick around after the party's over." It went over her head at the time, but I sincerely wish she's figured it out since. My friend's wife is a high school music teacher, and she told me a story. She went into class and was getting set up when she sees this kid take his trombone and place it between his legs and slid the slide out, going, "Look, I got a tromboner." She said it was very difficult to discipline him while not laughing her butt off. I confiscated a balloon from a kid one day because he was making that really loud squeaky noise with it. 2 minutes later I looked over and he had another balloon. A blue one this time. Took that one too. Next time I turned my head he pulled out another one. Red. Took it. This went on for another 2 minutes or so, which counted another 3 balloons. I finally asked him how much longer this was going to go on, to which he just kinda shrugged his shoulders. "Well, how many more balloons do you have?" I asked him. "I dunno. Couple," he said, as he opened his backpack. His backpack was literally full of balloons. There were at least a couple hundred in there. No books, no pencils, no spare room for anything else, save for the 5 or 6 balloons that I had confiscated a few minutes prior. There were 4 or 5 pockets on the bag that I asked him to empty, which were all filled with balloons as well. All in all, the kid was very dedicated to the gag, so I told him that if he promised to do the same thing to another particular teacher, he could get them back at the end of the class. This comment has been overwritten by an open source script to protect this user and app's privacy. It was created to help protect users from doxing, stalking, and harassment. I work in preschool. Kids come out of the bathroom with their pants down all the time, if they can't do the zipper or whatever. But one time a particular boy came running as fast as his pants around the ankles self could possibly run, and screamed, "Look what I can do," and proceeded to pee on the floor. We think he had just then figured out how to pee standing up. I pulled one of my students out of a 5th grade classroom for a moment to help him calm down. He was upset because a student he didn't like laughed at him. So I start with something along the lines of, "You can't change him but you can change how you react," and he responds with, "I can change his face with my fist." I wanted to acknowledge it was the perfect comeback, but I sternly addressed the aggression instead. I was showing my 8th graders how objects fall at the same rate, regardless of mass. I dropped a medicine ball with a basketball on top of it. The way they bounce makes the basketball go soaring. Anyway, I had a sprained wrist at the time, so one of my students offered to drop the balls for me. But when he did, the basketball hit the medicine ball at an odd angle and bounced back at him and hit him right in the nuts. Classroom of children aged 6-8. I tell them to do some math operations individually. I see that one of the children is copying her deskmates instead of doing her work herself, but I say nothing. When they are finished, I tell the children to hand me their notebooks and move to a different part of the room for a different activity, except the one who was copying. To that one I say to do her math work again since I saw her copying from child A. So she turns to me indignantly and yells, "That's a lie. I didn't copy from child A, I copied from child B." Not a teacher but as a student, this happened in my high school biology class. My biology teacher told us to get a pair of those latex-free rubber gloves from the box near the lab benches. A classmate raises her hand and says, "Ms. Teacher, you need more gloves. You only have right-handed gloves." Double quote. Classroom gives that WTF look, then bursts out laughing when we see the teacher losing it. While discussing a book wherein a girl has an affair with a dentist, a student raised his hand and said, "What do Kathy and cavities have in common? They both get filled by dentists." When the librarian was fussing around with an audio cable that wasn't working, a girl said, "Just pull it out, lick it, and stick it back in. That's what my boyfriend does and it works most of the time." I asked my class if anyone could define the word excruciating, and when no one raised their hand, a student said, "Thanks Obama, I love my job." We were sitting in a reading circle, reading the particularly tragic part of Bridge to Terabithia. My 5th graders were getting teary and it was rather emotional. Out of nowhere, the quietest kid in the class releases the largest, reverberating fart. Needless to say, he was mortified. The kids were laughing uproariously, and I was attempting to maintain some sort of composure. And then, another, this time from me, as I moved over to reorganize the circle. Oh yeah, it was over. I'm a math teacher and one February I gave my students an assignment where they were to write a simple one-page paper on a black mathematician. It was an extremely simple assignment that could be completed in 30 minutes. One kid turns it in and it's clearly plagiarized. He simply copied and pasted an article off the internet, and even left the links underlined in the copy he turned in. Per school policy I gave him a 0, wrote him up, and called his mom to explain what he had done. Her defense, "You never said in the directions he couldn't plagiarize." It was all I could do to keep from laughing at her on the phone. With a huge grin on my face I calmly said, "Well, when you walk into a bank there are no signs saying, 'Don't rob the bank.' It's just understood." The entire school had to go to the auditorium to watch a presentation on the dangers of basically anything in life. A major focus of it was Grand Theft Auto. They showed clips of guys hitting women with golf clubs and running H over to get their money back, and they would end each one of those with "You could turn out this way if you're not careful." Fast forward to last hour Spanish class. We were in the history teacher's room because the Spanish room was having the radiator fixed. The Spanish teacher is telling us this Spanish folk tale about this woman who had 100 kids. One kid was so jealous his mom was giving the other 99 kids attention. He killed them, leaving him to be the only child. My friend says out loud, "Huh, he must have played Grand Theft Auto as a kid." From the corner of the room, we hear her then see the history teacher bury his head in his arms to hide the laughter. Had a sub for my 8th grade class one day. Returned the next day to a scathing note from the sub about one of my students' abhorrent behavior. She actually used the word abhorrent. When I got to the bottom of it, here is what had happened. The sub was a fairly cute, younger woman. One of my male students had walked up to the sub and asked, "Hey Ms. Sublady, I lost my phone number, can I have yours?" That was it. I had to discipline the kid because of how offended the sub was, but I was holding back a chuckle the entire time. On another occasion we had to watch some lame school district mandated video and my entire class was clearly about to die from boredom. I had a big container of rubber bands at my desk, so I sat there during the film and shot them out into the class. Everyone was trying to contain themselves because they thought that one of their classmates was getting away with it. At one point I fired one off and it hit one of those aluminum louver deals that is attached to those long fluorescent lights. It made a loud ting sound and all of my students were about to bust up laughing. Gotta give the kid credit for having the balls. Right. Took my kids out on a lesson trip. We had to get a train somewhere, and one of my students is only 8 years old, so I'll let them go through the ticketed barrier with me. Yet, he wasn't quick enough and the barrier smacked him in the face. I've never wanted to laugh so hard in my life. Used to teach high school here in the US. I'm in the front of the classroom talking about stoichiometry and balancing reactions. Out of the corner of my eye I see two girls talking to each other and not paying attention to me. The rest of the class was though, so I didn't want to pause the class just to get their attention. I sort of ignore them for the duration of the lecture and keep observing them out of the corner of my eye, waiting for them to look over at me. One girl shows the other girl her palms like they're about to give each other a double high five while the other was visibly nodding her head in agreement. The second girl then begins to cup her own boobs and then the first girl says something like, "Wow, you're right," and she moves her hands to the other girl's chest. Warning: lesbian schoolgirl fantasy ends here. At this point I finally catch their eyes and I mouth the words, "What the frick" to them. They immediately sit up straight and they pay attention for the rest of the lesson. During individual study time I go up to the two of them and was about to tell them how inappropriate their actions were, especially when surrounded by teenage boys who'd get a raging boner from, well, anything. As I'm walking up to them, they take a look at me, look down at my hands, and then begin to freak out and saying, "Oh my god," repeatedly, with no advance warning. They then grab my hands and do the whole hand size comparison thing. I'm a lanky 6.5 foot tall man with pretty large features. I can palm a basketball. They then begin explaining how they were talking about how big their hands, or boyfriend's hands, had to be to fully cover their boobs. Not wanting to hear more, I start shaking my head incredulously, "What the frick?" and begin walking away. Their last remark to me was, "You can get any girl you want with those hands, Mr. Big Tm." Took a ton of willpower not to turn around, smirk and give the two of them bro fists. Don't you dare turn that last statement into something pervy. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.